The fluorescent lights of the grocery store buzzed overhead as Marcos Chen counted the crumpled bills in his wallet one more time. $20. That was all that stood between his 6-year-old daughter Emma and another night of cereal for dinner. He had no idea that this moment, this choice he was about to make, would change both their lives forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn rain drummed against the windows of Miller's grocery. As Marcos pushed the squeaky shopping cart through the aisles, Emma skipped alongside him, her worn sneakers making soft patting sounds on the linoleum floor. Her dark hair was pulled back in a ponytail that he'd managed to secure with one of her colorful hair ties, a small victory in his daily battle to keep up with single parenthood. "Daddy, can we get good cereal today?" Emma asked, pointing to a box of chocolate-flavored cereal that cost $3 more than their usual generic brand. Marcos glanced at the price tag and felt the familiar knot in his stomach tighten. "Maybe next week, sweetheart. Let's stick with our regular one today." Emma nodded without complaint. At 6 years old, she had already learned not to ask for much. The realization broke Marcos's heart every time he saw that understanding in her eyes, the way she accepted their limitations with a maturity no child should have to possess. 3 months ago, Marcos had been a project manager at Henderson Construction, pulling in a steady salary that allowed them small luxuries like name brand, cereal, and occasional trips to the ice cream parlor downtown. Then the company downsized, and 20 employees, including Marcos, found themselves searching for work in a market that seemed to have fewer opportunities each day. His unemployment benefits had run out 2 weeks ago. The part-time job he'd found at Murphy's auto shop paid cash under the table, enough to keep their small apartment and put food on the table, but barely. Tony Murphy was a good man who understood Marcos's situation, but the shop's business had been slow lately. Some weeks, Marcos only got 15 hours of work. "Daddy, what about milk?" Emma pointed to the dairy section. Marcos calculated quickly. In his head, bread, peanut butter, the generic cereal, a bag of apples, and milk would put them right at $18. He could make it work. The remaining $2 would have to cover any unexpected expense that might come up before his next paycheck. As they made their way toward the checkout, Emma suddenly stopped walking. "Daddy, look!" Near the magazine rack, a young woman sat on the floor with her back against the wall. She couldn't have been more than 22 or 23, with auburn hair that needed washing and clothes that had seen better days. In her arms, she held a baby who couldn't have been more than 8 months old. The infant was crying, a weak, tired sound that spoke of hunger and exhaustion. "Ma'am?" Marcos approached cautiously. "Are you all right?" The woman looked up, and Marcos saw desperation in her green eyes. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. We're just resting for a minute. We'll move along." "No, please, you don't have to move. I was just concerned." "Are you okay?" The woman's name was Sarah Mitchell, though Marcos wouldn't learn that until later. Right. Now, she was just a mother in trouble, holding her baby son closer, as if that could shield him from the world's harsh realities. "We're fine," Sarah said, but her voice cracked on the word fine. The baby's crying intensified, and she bounced him gently, whispering soft reassurances that seemed to break her own heart. Emma tugged on Marcos's jacket. "Daddy, the baby sounds hungry." Marcos knelt down to Sarah's level. "When's the last time you ate?" Sarah's cheeks flushed red. "We're managing. Really, we don't need—" "That wasn't what I asked." Marcos's voice was gentle but persistent. "When did you last have a real meal?" The silence stretched between them. The baby's crying had reduced to small whimpers, but the sound was somehow worse than the earlier wails. It spoke of a child who had learned that crying didn't always bring help. "Yesterday morning," Sarah finally whispered. maybe the morning. Before, time kind of blurs together. Marcos felt something twist in his chest. He looked at his own cart, their modest groceries that represented careful planning and sacrifice. Then he looked at Sarah and her baby, and the decision made itself. "Come on," he said, standing up and extending his hand to Sarah. "Let's get you both something to eat." "I can't accept charity," Sarah said quickly. "We'll be fine. My boyfriend, he's coming to pick us up soon." Emma stepped forward with the innocent directness that only children possess. "My daddy makes really good sandwiches, and we have extra peanut butter." "Emma," Marcos said softly, but he was smiling. His daughter's compassion never failed to amaze him. Sarah looked between Marcos and Emma, then down at her son, who had begun to fuss again. The internal struggle was visible on her face. Pride warring with necessity, dignity fighting against desperation. "I have money," Marcos said. "Not much, but enough to get you and the baby some food. No strings attached, no charity, just one parent helping another." "I can't pay you back," Sarah said, tears threatening to spill from her eyes. "I'm not asking you to." The checkout line moved slowly, giving Marcos time to second-guess his decision. $20 had been their food budget for the next 3 days. Now he was spending it on groceries for a stranger and her baby, plus whatever Sarah needed. His practical side screamed that this was foolish, that he had his own child to think about, but every time he looked at Emma, who was making silly faces at Sarah's baby and giggling when the infant smiled back, he knew he was making the right choice. At the deli counter, Marcos ordered pre-made sandwiches, a container of soup, and a small package of formula. Sarah protested weakly, but the baby's needs overrode her pride. When Marcos added a bottle of juice and a package of crackers, she didn't object at all. "What's his name?" Emma asked, gently touching the baby's hand. "Jacob," Sarah said. "His name is Jacob. That's a nice name. I'm Emma, and this is my daddy, Marcos." "Sarah," the young woman replied, "and thank you, both of you." "I don't know how to—" "You don't need to say anything," Marcos interrupted. "We've all been in tough spots." The total came to $37. Marcos handed over his 20, then reached into his pocket for the handful of quarters and dimes he'd been saving. Still short by $4.18, without hesitation, he pulled out his debit card, the one connected to their account that held exactly $12.34. His last safety net gone in an instant. Sarah noticed his hesitation with the card. "Please, I can do without the soup. Or the juice." "We don't need—" "You need to eat," Marcos said firmly, sliding the card through the reader and praying it would go through. It did. Outside the store, the rain had softened to a gentle mist that caught the afternoon light. Sarah sat on a bench near the entrance, feeding Jacob with the formula, while Emma watched with fascination. "Babies are so little," Emma observed. "Were you that little when you were a baby, Daddy?" "Even littler," Marcos replied, sitting beside Sarah. "You were the tiniest thing I'd ever seen." Sarah looked up from feeding Jacob. "Where's Emma's mom, if you don't mind me asking?" The question that always came, sooner or later. Marcos had gotten better at answering it over the years, but it never got easier. "She passed away when Emma was 2, he said simply. "Car accident." "I'm sorry." "Thank you, it's been just Emma and me ever since." Sarah nodded, understanding passing between them. Different circumstances, but both of them navigating parenthood alone. "What about Jacob's father?" Marcos asked gently. Sarah's expression hardened. "What about him?" The tone told Marcos everything he needed to know. Another story of abandonment, another parent left to manage alone. Jacob finished his bottle and let out a small burp that made Emma giggle. The sound seemed to lighten the mood, and Sarah even smiled, the first genuine smile Marcos had seen. From her. "Where are you staying?" Marcos found himself asking. The smile faded. "We're figuring that out. Sarah, there's a shelter about 2 miles from here. Sometimes they have space. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Marcos felt his heart sink. Sometimes, they're usually full by evening. But sometimes, people don't show up, or they make exceptions for families with babies. Emma looked up at her father with those expressive eyes that seemed to see everything. "Daddy, what if they don't have space?" The question hung in the air. Marcos looked at Sarah, who was focusing intently on cleaning Jacob's face with a napkin, avoiding eye contact. "How long have you been?" Marcos started. 3 weeks, Sarah said quietly, "since my landlord decided he could get more rent from someone else. Legally, he couldn't evict me that fast, but when you're barely scraping together rent money each month, you can't exactly hire a lawyer to fight it." The story was becoming clearer, and it was one Marcos recognized all too well. The thin line between stability and catastrophe, the way one missed payment or unexpected expense could send everything tumbling down. "Do you have family in the area?" Sarah shook her head. "My parents, we don't talk anymore. They didn't approve of Jacob's father, and when I got pregnant." She trailed off, then straightened her shoulders. "It doesn't matter. Jacob and I are doing fine on our own." But they weren't fine, and everyone sitting on that bench knew it. Jacob was clean and cared for, but Sarah's exhaustion was evident in every line of her body, the kind of bone-deep tiredness that came from weeks of uncertainty, of not knowing where the next meal or safe place to sleep would come from. "What kind of work did you do?" Marcos asked. "Before, I was a waitress. At Romano's downtown. Good tips, flexible schedule, perfect for a single mom." Sarah's voice carried a bitter edge. "Until the restaurant changed management and decided they needed servers with more availability. Apparently, needing to arrange childcare makes you unreliable." Emma had been listening to the adult conversation with the intense, focused children. Bring to topics they don't fully understand, but sense are important. Now, she stood up and walked over to Sarah. "My daddy lost his job too," she said matter-of-factly. "But he says things will get better. Maybe things will get better for you and Jacob too." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, sweetheart. I hope so." The afternoon was growing later, and Marcus knew he needed to get Emma home for dinner and homework. But the thought of leaving Sarah and Jacob to face the evening alone made his stomach churn. "The shelter," he said. "What time do they start taking people for the night?" 6 o'clock. But you need to be there by 5:30 to get in line." Marcos checked his phone. It was already 4:15. "Come on," he said, standing up. "I'll drive." "You over there. You don't have to." "Sarah, it's fine. My car's right over there." The drive to the shelter was quiet, except for Emma's chatter about school and Jacob's occasional gurgles from his car seat, a battered infant seat that Sarah had managed to hold on to through everything. Marcos found himself taking the long way, not wanting to deliver Sarah and Jacob to an uncertain fate any sooner than necessary. The Riverside Community Shelter sat on a street that had seen better days, wedged between a laundromat and a check-cashing business. Even from the parking lot, Marcos could see the line forming outside the building's entrance. Men and women of various ages, some with children, all carrying the weight of circumstances beyond their control. "Looks like there's already quite a few people," Sarah observed, her voice carefully neutral. Marcos counted. 23 people in line, and more arriving by the minute. Sarah gathered Jacob and the bag of food Marcos had bought, preparing to join the hopeful crowd. "Sarah," Marcos said as she reached for the door handle. She turned back to him. "If they don't have space tonight—" He paused, the words feeling both necessary and impossible. "Do you have my number?" "I don't have a phone," she admitted. Marcos reached into his wallet and pulled out a business card from his old job, one of the few he had left. He crossed out the company information and wrote his personal cell phone number on the back. "If you need anything," he said, Anything at all. Sarah took the card and looked at it for a long moment. Why are you doing this? You don't even know me. It was a fair question, and one Marcos had been asking himself. The practical answer was that he couldn't afford to help anyone right now. His own situation was precarious enough. But looking at Sarah holding Jacob, seeing the way Emma had immediately wanted to help, he realized the practical answer wasn't the important one. Because someone needs to, he said simply. Sarah nodded, understanding something unspoken in his answer. She leaned over and kissed the top of Emma's head. Thank you for sharing your daddy today, Emma beamed. Will we see you and Jacob again? I hope so, sweetheart. Marcos and Emma watched from the car as Sarah took her place in line. Jacob seemed content in her arms, fed and warm for the moment. Other people in line smiled at the baby, and Marcos saw an older woman offer Sarah a small blanket for Jacob. Even in the hardest circumstances, people found ways to care for each other. Daddy, Emma said as they drove home, are Sarah and Jacob going to be okay? It was the question Marcos had been dreading because he didn't have a good answer. I hope so, baby. I really hope so. Me too. Jacob's really cute. And Sarah seems nice. She does. Daddy, yes? I'm glad we helped them today, even if it means we have to eat cereal for dinner. Marcos looked at his daughter in the rearview mirror. This incredible little person who somehow understood that kindness was more important than convenience, that helping others mattered even when you didn't have much to give. Me too, Emma. Me too. That night, as Emma slept in her bed surrounded by her stuffed animals, Marcos sat at their small kitchen table with a calculator and a stack of bills. The numbers didn't add up the way they needed to. Helping Sarah had put them in a tighter spot than they were already in, and he still had 3 days until his next paycheck from Murphy's auto shop. But every time he started to regret the decision, he thought about Jacob's weak crying in the grocery store, about Sarah's exhaustion, about the way Emma had immediately wanted to help. Some things were more important than balancing a budget. His phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number. Hello? Marcos? It's Sarah. Sarah from the grocery store. His heart jumped. Are you okay? Did you get into the shelter? Yes, we got in. Jacob. And I have a place to sleep tonight. Her voice was tired but relieved. I just wanted to call and thank you again, and to tell you that I'm going to pay you back. I don't know when, but I will. Sarah, you don't need to worry about— Yes, I do. What you did today, it was more than just buying us food. You treated us with dignity when a lot of people would have just walked past. That means everything. Marcos felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the tea he'd been drinking. How's Jacob doing? He's sleeping. Really sleeping for the first time in days. A full belly makes all the difference. They talked for a few more minutes, small. Talk about Emma's school, about Jacob's development, about the weather. Normal conversation between two parents, despite the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them together. After Sarah hung up, Marcos sat in the quiet of his apartment and thought about the day. $20 had seemed like so little when he'd handed it over, but somehow it had been enough to make a difference. Not just for Sarah and Jacob, but for him and Emma too. His daughter had learned something valuable today about compassion and generosity, and Marcos had been reminded that even when you think you have nothing left to give, there's always something. The bills on the table still didn't add up. Tomorrow would still bring its challenges. But tonight, a mother and baby were sleeping safely because one person had decided to help. Sometimes that's how change begins, not with grand gestures or perfect circumstances, but with ordinary people choosing kindness when it matters most. The morning sun streamed through the blinds of Marcos's apartment as he prepared Emma's breakfast. 2 days had passed since their encounter with Sarah and Jacob, and their refrigerator told the story of their generosity. A few slices of bread, some peanut butter, and a carton of milk that would last maybe one more day. Emma sat at the table, carefully working on her spelling homework while eating her toast. She had accepted their limited breakfast options without complaint, the same way she'd adapted to so many changes in their life together. "Daddy, how do you spell kindness?" she asked, pencil hovering over her workbook. "Kindness," Marcos replied, tying his work boots. "That's a good word. Mrs. Patterson said we have to write about a time when someone was kind to us, or when we were kind to someone else." Marcos paused in his boot tying. "What are you going to write about?" Emma's face lit up. "About how we helped Sarah and Jacob, and about how you always make me feel better when I'm sad. The simple honesty of children never failed to humble him." Here he was, worried about their dwindling resources, and Emma was focused on the good they'd been able to do. His phone rang as he grabbed his jacket. Tony Murphy's name appeared on the screen. "Hey, Tony. Marcos, I've got some good news and some not-so-good news. Which do you want first?" Marcos felt his stomach tighten. In his experience, conversations that started this way rarely ended well. "Give me the good news. The Hendersons want us to do the electrical work on their kitchen. Renovation. It's a big job, probably 2 weeks of solid work." "That's great. What's the not-so-good news?" "They can't start until next Monday, and they want to see our licensing and insurance paperwork first. Professional job, professional requirements." Marcos understood immediately. Tony's shop operated mostly on handshake deals and cash payments. The Henderson job would require everything to be above board, which meant official employee status, tax withholdings, and insurance coverage. Good for the long term, but it also meant no work and no pay for the rest of this week. "I get it," Marcos said. "What do you need me to do?" "Come in today, and we'll get all the paperwork sorted. I'll pay you for today's time, but then we'll both have to wait until the Henderson job starts." After hanging up, Marcos did quick math in his head. 1 day's pay would cover maybe half of what they needed for the week. He'd have to figure out something else for the remaining days. "Emma ready for school?" "Almost. I just need to finish writing about kindness." While Emma completed her homework, Marcos's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Sarah. The shelter can only let us stay 3 more nights. Do you know of anywhere else that takes families with babies?" Marcos stared at the message, his heart sinking. He typed back, "Let me make some calls and see what I can find out." But even as he sent the message, he knew the reality. Shelters in their area were overcrowded, and places that accepted families with infants were especially limited. Sarah and Jacob were facing the possibility of sleeping on the streets. "Ready, Daddy," Emma announced, shouldering her backpack. The drive to Emma's school usually took 10 minutes, but today Marcos found himself taking the scenic route, his mind racing through possibilities for helping Sarah. By the time he dropped Emma off, he'd made a decision that both scared and excited him. Instead of heading straight to Tony's shop, he made a detour to the Riverside Community Shelter. The building looked different in the morning light, less imposing, more hopeful. Inside, the lobby buzzed with activity as residents prepared for their day. Some were heading to jobs, others to appointments or interviews. Despite their circumstances, there was a sense of purpose and dignity that struck Marcos immediately. "Can I help you?" asked a woman behind the front desk. Her name tag read Janet, and her smile was warm but tired. "I'm looking for someone who stayed here a couple nights ago. Sarah Mitchell? She has a baby." "Are you family?" "No, I'm a friend. I helped her get here the other night." Janet's expression softened. "Oh, you must be Marcos. Sarah mentioned you. Hold on." She disappeared through a door marked Staff Only and returned a few minutes later with Sarah, who was carrying Jacob in her arms. The baby looked alert and healthy, his eyes bright as he took in the unfamiliar surroundings. "Marcos." Sarah's face showed surprise and something that might have been relief. "What are you doing here?" I got your text about needing to find another place. I thought maybe I could help. Sarah's shoulders sagged slightly. I've called everywhere. There's a waiting list for family housing that's 3 months long, and the other shelters. She shook her head. They either don't take infants or they're full. Jacob began to fuss, and Sarah bounced him gently. The motion seemed automatic, the response of a mother who'd learned to soothe her child under difficult circumstances. What about family? Marcos asked. I know you said you don't talk to your parents, but maybe if they knew about Jacob. I tried calling yesterday, Sarah admitted. My mother hung up when she heard my voice. The pain in her words was evident, and Marcos felt anger on her behalf. Whatever had happened between Sarah and her family, surely a grandchild would be reason enough to bridge that gap. What about job prospects? Any leads? Sarah brightened slightly. Actually, yes. There's a diner about 6 blocks from here that's hiring. The manager said I could start next week if I can arrange reliable childcare. That's great news. It would be if I had somewhere stable to live and someone to watch Jacob during my shifts. The circular nature of her problems was becoming clear. She needed a job to afford housing, but she needed housing and childcare to work. Breaking that cycle required help, and Sarah was running out of options. Sarah, Marcos said, the words coming out before he could second-guess himself, what if you and Jacob stayed with Emma and me for a while, just until you get on your feet? Sarah stared at him, Jacob still fussing in her arms. I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking, I'm offering. Marcos, you barely know me, and you have your own daughter to think about. Emma would love having Jacob around, and you need a safe place to stay while you start your new job. Sarah looked around the shelter lobby, then back at Marcos. What if it doesn't work out? What if Jacob keeps you awake at night, or Emma gets tired of having us there, or then we'll figure it out, Marcos interrupted. But right now, you need help, and I'm in a position to give it. The conversation was interrupted by Jacob's crying, which had escalated from fussing to full-voiced protest. Sarah tried to soothe him, but he was clearly hungry and tired. Let me get his bottle, she said, reaching for a diaper bag that had seen better days. As Sarah prepared Jacob's formula, Marcos found himself thinking about his own apartment. It was small, just 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a living room that opened into a tiny kitchen. But Emma's room had twin beds, and the couch in the living room could work as a temporary bed for Sarah. Marcos, Sarah said, as Jacob settled into, drinking his bottle, why are you doing this, really? It was the same question she'd asked in the grocery store, and his answer remained the same. Because someone needs to. But you're struggling too. Emma told me about your job situation while we were waiting in the shelter line. Marcos smiled. Emma talks a lot. She's a special little girl. She talked about you the whole time we were in line. About how you make her pancakes on Saturday mornings, and how you help her with her homework, and how you always make sure she has everything she needs, even when things are hard. The description of his parenting through Emma's eyes made Marcos's chest tighten with emotion. I'm just trying to do right by her. That's exactly what I'm trying to do for Jacob, which is why I can't accept your offer. Why not? Because what if something happens? What if Jacob gets sick, or I can't find steady work, or... Sarah's voice trailed off. I can't risk dragging your family down with me. Marcos studied Sarah's face, seeing the fear beneath her pride. She wasn't just worried about being a burden. She was terrified of forming connections that might be ripped away. Sarah, can I tell you something? She nodded. 3 years ago, when Emma was 3, I got pneumonia. Really bad. I was in the hospital for a week, and Emma had to stay with neighbors I barely knew. I was so scared that social services would decide I couldn't take care of her properly. Sarah listened intently, Jacob now content in her arms. The neighbors, the Johnsons, they took Emma in like she was their own granddaughter. They didn't. Know me well, didn't owe me anything, but they helped because that's what people do for each other. What happened? I got better, obviously, but the Johnsons became like family to us. Emma still calls them Grandma and Grandpa Johnson. Sometimes the help we're afraid to accept becomes the foundation for something beautiful. Sarah was quiet. For a long moment, considering his words. Jacob had finished his bottle and was making small, contented sounds. If, and I mean if, I agreed to this, it would only be temporary, until I can save enough for a deposit on an apartment. Of course, and I'd pay you rent as soon as I start getting paychecks. Sarah, no, that's not negotiable. I won't be a charity case. Marcos recognized the steel in her voice and decided not to argue. Okay. And if Emma or you change your minds, if it becomes too much, you have to promise to tell me immediately. I promise. Sarah looked down at Jacob, who was now dozing in her arms. He's been through so much already. I just want him to have some stability. This could be a step toward that. Okay, Sarah said quietly. Okay, yes, thank you. The relief in her voice was palpable, and Marcos felt a weight he hadn't realized he was carrying lift from his shoulders. They would figure out the logistics later, the sleeping arrangements, the household routines, the practical details of 3 adults and 1 baby sharing a small space. For now, it was enough that Sarah and Jacob would have a safe place to sleep. When do you need to be out of here? Marcos asked. Tomorrow morning. Perfect. I'll pick you up after I drop Emma at school. As Marcos prepared to leave, Sarah caught his arm. Marcos, I meant what I said about paying you back for the groceries, and now this. She gestured around the shelter. I don't know how I'll ever repay this kindness. You don't need to repay kindness, Sarah. You just need to pass it forward when you can. The drive to Tony's shop gave Marcos time to process what he'd just committed to. His practical side whispered warnings about taking in strangers, about the additional expenses, about the complications this could create in his carefully managed life. But his heart felt lighter than it had in months. Tony was waiting with a stack of paperwork when Marcos arrived at the shop. You look like a man who just made a big decision, Tony observed, handing Marcos a W-4 form, something like that. Tony, can I ask you a personal question? Shoot. Have you ever helped someone you barely knew? Really helped, I mean. Not just spare change or a quick favor. Tony leaned back in his desk chair, considering the question. My wife and I took in my sister's kids for 2 years when she was getting clean from drugs. Nearly broke us financially, and it sure tested our marriage. But those kids needed stability, and sometimes family means more than blood relations. Any regrets? Hell no. Those kids are grown now, and my sister's been clean for 15 years. Sometimes the biggest risks lead to the biggest rewards. Marcos filled out the employment paperwork, thinking about risks and rewards. Taking in Sarah and Jacob was definitely a risk, financially, emotionally, practically. But Emma's essay about kindness had reminded him that the most important lessons weren't taught with words, but with actions. After finishing at the shop, Marcos drove to Emma's school for pickup. The afternoon routine was familiar and comforting. Waiting in the line of cars, watching for Emma's distinctive bouncing walk as she emerged from the building, listening to her chatter about her day as they drove home. Daddy, guess what? Emma said as she buckled her seatbelt. What? Mrs. Patterson read my story about kindness to the whole class. She said it was a beautiful example of how helping others makes the whole world better. I'm proud of you, sweetheart. She asked if you were a superhero because I wrote about how you always help people even when it's hard. Marcos smiled, thinking about Sarah and Jacob waiting at the shelter. What did you tell her? I said, you're not a superhero, you're just my daddy, but that you have a superhero heart. The simple faith in her words made Marcos's eyes water slightly. Emma, how would you feel about having some house guests for a while? What kind of house guests? Remember Sarah and Jacob from the grocery store? Emma's face lit up immediately. "Are they coming to stay with us? If it's okay with you." "Sarah got a job, but she needs a place to stay while she saves money for her own apartment. Can I help take care of Jacob? I've never had a baby brother before." "He's not your brother, Emma. He's our guest." "But can I help anyway?" "Of course, but remember, Jacob is very little, and Sarah is his mommy. We're just helping them out." Emma nodded seriously, already planning what toys she could share with Jacob and how she could help Sarah feel welcome. That evening, Marcos sat Emma down for a more serious conversation about what it would mean to have Sarah and Jacob living with them. "It means our apartment will be more crowded," he explained, "and we'll need to be extra considerate about noise and privacy. Sarah and Jacob have been through some hard times, so we want to make them feel safe and welcome." "Will Jacob sleep?" "In my room, probably. Is that okay? I think it will be like having a sleepover every night." Emma's enthusiasm was infectious, but Marcos wanted to make sure she understood the reality. "Sometimes babies cry at night, sweetheart, and sometimes grown-ups have problems that make them sad or worried. If Sarah seems upset sometimes, it's not because of anything you did. I know, Daddy, you get sad sometimes too when you think I'm not looking. But I still love you, and I'll still love Sarah and Jacob, even if they're sad sometimes." Once again, Emma's emotional intelligence amazed him. At 6 years old, she had a better grasp of human nature than many adults. "There's one more thing," Marco said. "This is temporary. Sarah and Jacob will find their own place eventually, and then it will be just you and me again." Emma considered this. "But they'll still be our friends, right?" "I hope so." "Good. I like having friends." As Emma got ready for bed, Marcos prepared the living room for Sarah. He moved furniture around to make space for a makeshift baby area, set up the couch with clean sheets and pillows, and tried to think of other things Sarah and Jacob might need. The apartment felt different already, more alive, somehow with the anticipation of new voices and new energy. That night, as Marcos tucked Emma into bed, she asked, "Daddy, are we rich?" The question caught him off guard. "What do you mean?" "Well, if we can help Sarah and Jacob, we must have lots of money, right?" Marcos sat on the edge of her bed, thinking about how to answer. "We don't have lots of money, Emma, but we have enough to share with people who need help." "So we're rich in kindness." "Yes," Marcos said, kissing her forehead. "We're very rich in kindness." As Emma drifted off to sleep, Marcos stood in the doorway of her room, looking at the empty twin bed where Jacob would sleep tomorrow night. In less than 24 hours, their quiet life would become much more complicated. But complications weren't always bad things. Sometimes they were the beginning of something wonderful. The morning air carried the scent of autumn leaves as Marcos pulled into the shelter parking lot. Emma had insisted on coming along to help welcome Sarah and Jacob to their new temporary home, and she bounced excitedly in her car seat. "Do you think Jacob will like the mobile I made him?" Emma asked, clutching a handmade creation of colorful paper stars she'd stayed up late assembling. "I think he'll love it," Marcos replied, though he suspected Jacob was still too young to appreciate Emma's artistic efforts. What mattered was Emma's desire to make their guests feel welcome. Inside the shelter, they found Sarah sitting in the lobby with Jacob and 2 small duffel bags that contained everything they owned. She looked nervous but determined, dressed in clothes that were clean but clearly well worn. "Ready for this?" Marcos asked. Sarah stood up, adjusting Jacob in her arms. "As ready as I'll ever be." Emma immediately approached Jacob, speaking in the exaggerated whisper children use around babies. "Hi, Jacob. I made you something special for your new room." The drive to Marcos's apartment was filled with Emma's enthusiastic chatter about all the things she wanted to show Jacob, while Sarah remained quiet, occasionally offering small smiles at Emma's excitement. "Here we are," Marcos announced as they pulled into the parking lot of Maple Grove Apartments, a modest complex that had seen better days but was well maintained and safe. Sarah looked up at the 3-story building, then at Marcos. "Which floor?" "Second. Apartment 2B. As they climbed the stairs, Jacob began to fuss. The new environment and unfamiliar sounds were clearly overwhelming for him. "He's probably just tired," Sarah said apologetically. "He didn't sleep well last night." "No need to apologize," Marcos said, fishing his keys from his pocket. "This is his home now too." The word home hung in the air as Marcos opened the door. Sarah stepped inside tentatively, taking in the modest living space. The apartment was small but clean, with well-worn furniture and children's artwork decorating the refrigerator. "It's not much," Marcos said, "but it's comfortable." "It's perfect," Sarah replied, and the relief in her voice was genuine. Emma immediately took charge of the tour. "This is the living room, and that's the kitchen, and over here is my daddy's room, and this is my room where Jacob gets to sleep too." Sarah followed Emma into the bedroom, where 2 twin beds sat against opposite walls. Emma had clearly spent time preparing for Jacob's arrival. One bed was decorated with stuffed animals and a hand-drawn welcome sign, while the other remained Emma's domain of books and more stuffed animals. "I moved some of my toys so Jacob would have space," Emma announced proudly. "And look," she held up the Paper Star mobile. "I made this for him." "Emma, that's beautiful," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "Jacob is very lucky to have such a thoughtful friend." Jacob had stopped, fussing, and was now looking around with wide eyes, taking in the bright decorations and Emma's animated presence. "Would it be okay if I hung this over his bed?" Emma asked Marcos. "Of course, let me get some tape." As Marcos helped Emma install the mobile, Sarah stood in the doorway watching. The simple domesticity of the scene, a father helping his daughter welcome a baby into their home, seemed to overwhelm her. "Sarah," Marcos noticed her expression. "Everything all right?" "It's just, I haven't seen kindness like this in a long time. Jacob and I have been managing on our own for so long that I forgot what it felt like to have people care." Emma looked up from adjusting the mobile. "My daddy says caring for people is what makes families strong. Maybe we can be like a family." The innocence of the statement brought tears to Sarah's eyes. "I'd like that very much." The rest of the morning was spent settling in. Marcos showed Sarah where everything was: towels, coffee, the spare key. Sarah insisted on helping with household tasks, despite Marcos's protests that she was a guest. "If I'm going to stay here, I'm going to contribute," she said firmly, already starting to fold laundry that had been sitting in a basket. Around noon, Emma's stomach growled loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Lunchtime," Marcos announced. "I was thinking of grilled cheese sandwiches." "Can I help?" Sarah asked. "You don't need to." "Marcos, please, let me help. I used to cook all the time before." She trailed off, then straightened her shoulders. "I'd like to cook for you and Emma, as a way to say thank you." The kitchen was barely big enough for 2 people to work comfortably, but Sarah moved with the efficiency of someone who'd learned to cook in small spaces. She took inventory of what was available and began improvising. "Emma," she called, "you'd like tomato soup?" "Yes, Daddy makes it from the can." "How about homemade tomato soup?" Emma's eyes widened. "You can make soup?" Sarah smiled, the first genuinely relaxed smile Marcos had seen from her. "I can make lots of things. Cooking was one of my favorite parts of being a waitress. I liked creating something that made people happy." As Sarah worked, transforming basic ingredients into something that smelled amazing, Jacob sat contentedly in his carrier on the kitchen table. Emma provided commentary on everything, asking questions about each step of the cooking process. "Why do you put the onion in first?" Emma asked. "Because onions take longer to cook than other vegetables. And they make everything else taste better," Sarah explained patiently. Marcos found himself relaxing as he watched the 3 of them together. Emma's endless curiosity, Sarah's patient explanations, and Jacob's occasional happy gurgles created a comfortable rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. The soup was ready just as Jacob decided he was hungry too. Sarah excused herself to feed him while Marcos and Emma set the table. "Daddy," Emma whispered, "Sarah's soup smells way better than our can of soup." "I heard that," Sarah called from the living room, laughter in her voice. Lunch was a revelation. Sarah's tomato soup was rich and flavorful, made with ingredients Marcos had in his pantry but had never thought to combine. The grilled cheese sandwiches, made with Sarah's technique of buttering the outside and inside of the bread, were golden perfection. "This is incredible," Marcos said. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" "My grandmother. She raised me after my parents divorced when I was Emma's age. She said cooking was how you showed people you loved them." "What happened to your grandmother?" Emma asked with the directness of childhood. Sarah's expression grew sad. "She passed away when I was 18, right before I met Jacob's father." The timeline became clearer. Sarah had lost the most important person in her life and then found herself in a relationship that ultimately left her alone with a baby. No wonder she'd been so hesitant to accept help. "She sounds like she was a wonderful person," Marcos said. "She was. She would have loved Jacob so much." Sarah looked at her son, who was now napping peacefully in his carrier. "I try to cook the way she taught me. It makes me feel connected to her." After lunch, while Emma was in her room showing her stuffed animals to Jacob, Sarah insisted on doing the dishes. "You cooked, I clean," Marcos said. But Sarah was already filling the sink with soapy water. "We're partners in this household now," she said. "Partners share the work." As they worked side by side in the small kitchen, Marcos found himself thinking about how different the apartment felt with other people in it. The sounds of Emma talking to Jacob, the smell of homemade soup lingering in the air, the comfortable conversation with another adult. It was a kind of fullness he hadn't realized he'd been missing. "Marcos," Sarah said as she dried the last bowl, "I have to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." "Okay. Are you doing this because you feel sorry for me?" The question caught him off guard. "What do you mean?" "Taking us in, helping. With groceries, all of it. Are you doing it because I'm a charity case?" Marcos turned to face her fully. "Sarah, if I thought you were a charity case, do you think I'd trust you in my home with my daughter?" She considered this. "I suppose not. You're a good mother. You're clearly intelligent and capable. You've been dealt some difficult circumstances, but that doesn't define who you are. Then why help us? Because you needed help, and I was in a position to give it. And because—" He paused, searching for the right words. "Because Emma and I have been just getting by for so long. Having you and Jacob here reminds us what it feels like to be part of something bigger than just survival." Sarah was quiet for a moment, processing his words. "I've been so focused on not being a burden that I forgot people might actually want to help. We want to help. But more than that, we want you here. Emma hasn't stopped smiling since yesterday, and I haven't seen her this excited about anything in months." As if summoned by their conversation, Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Sarah, Jacob's awake, and I think he wants to see his mobile." The afternoon passed quickly. Sarah proved to be a natural with Emma, answering her endless questions and showing genuine interest in her drawings and stories. Emma, in turn, appointed herself Jacob's official entertainment committee, making faces and silly sounds that delighted the baby. Around 4 o'clock, Sarah's phone rang. She glanced at the number and frowned. "I need to take this," she said, stepping onto the small balcony. Through the glass door, Marcos could see her pacing as she talked, her body language growing increasingly tense. When she came back inside, her face was pale. "Everything okay?" Marcos asked. "That was the manager at the diner. The position I was supposed to start Monday? Someone else took it." Emma looked up from where she was playing peekaboo with Jacob. "What does that mean?" It means I need to find another job, Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. Marcos felt his heart sink. He knew how hard it had been for Sarah to find even that one opportunity. Starting the job search over again would mean more uncertainty, more stress, more time before she could get back on her feet. "What happened?" he asked. "The manager said they needed someone who could start immediately. And since I couldn't begin until I had stable housing and childcare arranged." She shrugged, but Marcos could see the disappointment behind her casual gesture. "So they gave the job to someone else because you were trying to be responsible?" "Apparently." Emma had stopped playing and was listening intently. "Will Sarah and Jacob have to leave now?" "No," Marcos said firmly, both to Emma and to Sarah. "Nobody's leaving. We'll figure this out." "Marcos, I can't stay here indefinitely without contributing." "Sarah, it's been one day. One setback doesn't erase everything else." But Marcos could see the doubt creeping back into Sarah's eyes, the same fear he'd seen at the shelter, the fear that she was destined to fail, that accepting help was just postponing the inevitable. "You know what?" he said suddenly. "I'm calling. Tony." "Who's Tony?" "My boss at the auto shop. They might need someone for administrative work, or maybe he knows of other opportunities." Sarah shook her head. "I don't have experience with office work." "You were a waitress, right? Customer service, handling multiple tasks at once, working under pressure. Those are exactly the skills most employers are looking for." Marcos pulled out his phone and dialed Tony's number. "Tony, it's Marcos. I have a friend who's looking for work. She's got great customer service experience and she's reliable. Yes, I'll vouch for her. Tomorrow? That would be perfect." He hung up and turned to Sarah. "Tony's cousin owns a small accounting firm downtown. They need someone to answer phones and do basic data entry. It's not glamorous, but it's steady work with regular hours." "Marcos, I don't know anything about accounting. You don't need to. They'll train you on what you need to know. Tony says his cousin is good people, fair wages, decent benefits, and he understands that life happens." Sarah looked skeptical. "What if I mess it up? What if you don't?" Emma had been listening to the entire conversation. Now she stood up and walked over to Sarah, taking her hand. "My daddy says you can't be afraid of things that might happen," she said seriously. "You have to try, and if it doesn't work, you try something else." Sarah looked down at Emma, then at Jacob, who was contentedly chewing on his fingers, and finally at Marcos. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll go talk to them." "That's the spirit," Marcos said. "What time is the appointment?" 10:30 tomorrow morning." "Perfect. I'll watch Jacob while you're there. Marcos, you don't have to—" "Sarah, stop. We're in this together now. That means when you have an interview, I watch Jacob. When I have to work, you help with Emma. That's what partners do." The word partners seemed to resonate with Sarah. For the first time since the phone call, she smiled. "Partners," she repeated. "I like the sound of that." That evening, as Sarah gave Jacob his bath in the kitchen sink while Emma provided commentary and suggestions, Marcos reflected on how quickly their little family had expanded. Less than 48 hours ago, it had been just him and Emma. Now their apartment buzzed with conversation, laughter, and the occasional crying of a content baby. It wasn't easier. In fact, it was considerably more complicated. But it was richer, fuller, more alive than their quiet existence had been. "Daddy," Emma said as he tucked her into bed later that night, "I like having Sarah and Jacob here. I can tell. You've been very helpful today. Sarah taught me how to make soup, and Jacob smiled at me 6 whole times." 6 times? That's a lot of smiles. Sarah says babies smile when they feel safe and happy, so Jacob must feel safe and happy here. I think you're right. Daddy, yes? Are we going to keep helping people, not just Sarah and Jacob, but other people too? The question surprised him. What do you mean? Well, helping Sarah and Jacob made us all happy. and it made them happy. And two, so maybe we should keep doing it. Emma, we can't save everyone, I know, but we could try to help someone else when Sarah and Jacob don't need help anymore. Right? Looking at his daughter's earnest face, Marcos realized that their act of kindness had taught Emma something profound about the power of compassion. She wasn't just learning to help others, she was learning that helping others was a way of life. Yes, he said, kissing her forehead. When we can help, we should help. Good. I like helping people. As Emma drifted off to sleep, Marcos could hear Sarah in the living room, quietly talking to Jacob as she prepared for bed. The sounds of another family settling in for the night felt strange and wonderful at the same time. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: Sarah's job interview, Jacob's needs, the continued juggling of responsibilities and limited resources. But tonight, their small apartment felt like exactly what Emma had called it, a home where people took care of each other, and sometimes that was enough to build something beautiful on. The morning of Sarah's interview arrived with an unexpected complication. Jacob had developed a slight fever during the night, nothing serious, but enough to make him fussy and clingy. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, bouncing him gently while checking her phone for the third time in 5 minutes. I should cancel, she said, worry creasing her forehead. I can't leave him when he's not feeling well. Marcos poured coffee into a travel mug, already dressed for his day at the auto shop. Sarah, babies get fevers. It's normal. He's not seriously sick. But what if he gets worse while I'm gone? What if he needs me? Emma emerged from the bedroom, still in her pajamas, but fully alert. Is Jacob okay? He has a little fever, Sarah explained. I'm not sure I should leave him today. Emma approached Jacob and gently touched his forehead with the back of her hand, mimicking something she'd seen adults do. He feels warm, but not super hot. And look, he's still smiling. Indeed, despite his elevated temperature, Jacob was responding to Emma's attention with small grins and happy sounds. See, Marcos said, he's fine. A little Tylenol, some extra fluids, and he'll be back to normal. You can't miss this opportunity because of a minor fever. Sarah looked torn between her maternal instincts and her practical needs. What if something happens while I'm at the interview? Then I'll call you immediately, Marcos said. Sarah, I've been taking care of a child for 6 years. I think I can handle a baby with a slight fever for 2 hours. Emma nodded sagely. My daddy took really good care of me when I had chickenpox. I threw up on him 3 times and he didn't even get mad. Emma, Marcos protested, but he was smiling. It's true. And Jacob won't throw up on you because he's not as sick as I was. Sarah finally smiled, her first genuine expression of the morning. You two have an answer for everything, don't you? That's what families do, Emma said matter-of-factly. We help each other with problems. The word families hung in the air for a moment. Sarah looked at Emma, then at Marcos, something shifting in her expression. Okay, she said finally. But I'm leaving my phone on, and if anything changes, I'll call immediately, Marcos promised. An hour later, Marcos stood in the doorway watching Sarah check her appearance in the hallway mirror. She'd borrowed a blazer from a neighbor, paired it with her best jeans and clean sneakers. It wasn't a traditional interview outfit, but she looked professional and confident. You look great, he said. I feel like I'm pretending to be someone I'm not. You're not pretending to be anything. You're showing them who you really are, someone reliable, intelligent, and capable. Sarah turned from the mirror. What if they ask about my recent work history? What do I say about being homeless? You tell them the truth, that you experienced a temporary setback, but you're ready to get back to work. Honesty isn't a weakness, Sarah. Jacob chose that moment to let out a small cry from the living room, where Emma was entertaining him with a puppet show. "He needs me," Sarah said, starting toward the sound. "No," Marco said gently but firmly. "He needs his mother to go get this job so she can build a stable life for him. Emma and I have this handled." Sarah hesitated, then took a deep breath. "You're right. I'll be back in 2 hours. Take your time, do whatever you need to do to get this job." After Sarah left, Marcos settled into the unfamiliar routine of caring for a baby. Jacob's fever had already started to break thanks to the children's Tylenol, but he was still more demanding than usual. Emma appointed herself as Marcos's assistant, fetching diapers and bottles with the seriousness of a medical professional. "Daddy, I think Jacob misses Sarah," Emma observed as Marcos tried to soothe the fussy baby. "I think you're right. This is the first time they've been apart since he was born. When you had to go to work and leave me with babysitters, I used to cry too." Marcos remembered those early days after Lisa's death, when every separation felt monumental. "You did, but you learned that I always came back. Jacob will learn that too." The wisdom in his 6-year-old daughter's words never ceased to amaze him. Yes, he will. By the time Sarah returned 2 hours later, Jacob had settled into a more normal rhythm. Emma was reading him a picture book while Marcos cleaned up toys scattered around the living room. "How did it go?" Marcos asked as Sarah walked through this. In Doctor, her expression was unreadable. "They offered me the job." Emma jumped up from the floor. "That's great, right? That's great?" "It is great," Sarah confirmed, but her tone was cautious. "It's 30 hours a week to start, with the possibility of full-time work if things work out. The pay is decent, and they have health insurance after 90 days. "That sounds perfect," Marcos said. "Why do you look worried?" Sarah sat down and reached for Jacob, who immediately calmed in her arms. "They want me to start Monday, and the hours are 9 to 3, Monday through Friday." "Okay. Marcos, that means I need full-time childcare for Jacob, the kind that costs more per week than I'll be making for the first month." The practical reality hit Marcos immediately. Daycare for infants was expensive, often requiring deposits and advance payments that Sarah couldn't afford. It was another version of the same cycle, needing money to make money. "What about the community center?" Emma suggested. "They have a daycare, and Miss Rodriguez is really nice." "That's actually not a bad idea," Marcos said. "The community center has subsidized childcare for low-income families. Let me make some calls." While Marcos worked the phone, Sarah played with Jacob on the living room floor. Emma had appointed herself as Jacob's entertainment director, and the baby was responding with more smiles and happy sounds than he'd shown all week. "Sarah," Emma said seriously, "are you going to like your new job?" "I hope so. It's been a long time since I had a regular job." "What will you do there?" "Answer phones, help customers, do some computer work, basic office stuff." "That sounds important," Sarah smiled. "It is important. Every job is important if you do it well. My daddy says that too. He says fixing cars is important because people need them to get places. Your daddy is very smart." "He is. And he's going to help you figure out the daycare problem, because that's what families do." There was that word again. Emma had used it so naturally, so matter-of-factly, that it was becoming impossible to ignore. Somewhere in the past few days, Emma had decided that Sarah and Jacob weren't just house guests, they were family. Marcos returned from his phone calls with mixed news. "The community center does have a program, but there's a waiting list. However, they said they sometimes have last-minute openings." "How long is the waiting list?" "Usually about a month, but it can be shorter if families move or change their situations." Sarah's face fell. "A month? I can't ask them to hold the job for a month." "What about Mrs. Chen from downstairs?" Emma suggested. "She watches kids sometimes." Marcos had seen Mrs. Chen around the building, an elderly woman who seemed kind, but was probably not equipped to handle a baby full-time. Emma, that's thoughtful. But Mrs. Chen is in her 70s. Taking care of a baby is a lot of work. What about Mrs. Johnson? Emma continued, referring to the neighbors who had helped them years ago. They love babies. The Johnsons moved to Florida last year, remember? Emma's face scrunched up in concentration. What about me? You! I could help watch Jacob. I know how to give him bottles and I can change diapers and I'm really good at making him laugh. Sarah looked touched by the offer. Emma, that's very sweet, but you have school. Only until 3 o'clock, and then I could help. Marcos was about to explain why a 6-year-old couldn't be responsible for infant care when an idea struck him. Emma, that's actually not completely crazy. Marcos, Sarah warned. No, hear me out. What if we combined resources? I work mornings at the shop, you work days at the office. I could watch Jacob until you get home, and Emma could help after school. That would mean you're working and babysitting at the same time. Not babysitting, co-parenting. The word slipped out before Marcos could stop it, and everyone went quiet. Jacob made a small gurgling sound that seemed loud in the sudden silence. I mean, Marcos corrected hastily, sharing childcare responsibilities, like roommates with kids. But the word had been said, and its implications hung in the air like smoke. Co-parenting implied something more permanent, more committed than their current arrangement. Sarah's cheeks had turned pink. And Marcos, I can't ask you to rearrange your work schedule to accommodate my job. You're not asking, I'm offering. And it's not rearranging. Tony's been flexible about my hours since the Henderson job fell through. I could easily shift to earlier. Mornings. What about your own job search? You can't work part-time at the shop forever. One problem at a time, Marcos said. Right now, the priority is getting you established in steady work. Emma had been following the conversation with intense interest. So Jacob would be here with Daddy during the day, and I could play with him after school, if Sarah agrees to the arrangement, Marcos said. Sarah looked down at Jacob, who was contentedly chewing on his fingers. It would only be temporary, until I can afford proper daycare, of course. And I'd pay you for watching him. Sarah, that's not negotiable, Marcos. If you're providing childcare, you're getting paid for it. Marcos started to argue, then saw the steel in her expression. This was clearly important to her sense of independence and dignity. Okay, he agreed. We'll work out something fair. So, I can accept the job. You can accept the job. The relief on Sarah's face was profound. She picked up Jacob and held him close, whispering something in his ear that made him smile. I need to call them back and confirm, she said. While Sarah made her phone call, Emma sidled up to Marcos. Daddy, what's co-parenting? Marcos felt his cheeks warm. It's when two adults work together to take care of children, like what you and Sarah are doing with Jacob and me. Something like that. So, we really are like a family now? The question was so hopeful, so innocent, that Marcos felt his heart clench. Emma, Sarah, and Jacob are our friends, good friends who are staying with us for a while, but we take care of each other like a family. Yes, we do. And we eat together, and live together, and help each other with problems. Yes. Then we're a family, Emma concluded with 6-year-old logic. Maybe not the regular kind, but a family anyway. Before Marcos could respond, Sarah returned from her phone call, beaming. I start Monday morning at 9 o'clock, she announced. Congratulations, Emma cheered, running to hug Sarah's legs. Thank you, Sarah said, including both Emma and Marcos in her gratitude. I couldn't have done this without you both. That evening, they celebrated Sarah's new job with a special dinner. Sarah insisted on cooking, creating something magical out of basic ingredients. the apartment filled with the smells of garlic and herbs, and even Jacob seemed to sense the festive mood, babbling happily from his high chair. "To new beginnings," Marcos said, raising his glass of water in a toast. "To families who choose each other," Sarah added, her eyes meeting his across the table. Emma raised her cup of juice. "To helping people and being happy." "To Jacob not spitting up on anyone tonight," Marcos added, making everyone laugh as they clinked glasses. Marcos reflected on how dramatically their lives had changed in just a few days. What had started as a simple act of kindness, sharing $20 with a hungry mother and baby, had evolved into something much more complex and meaningful. After dinner, while Sarah bathed Jacob and Emma finished her homework, Marcos found himself thinking about the future. Sarah's job was a positive step, but it was just the beginning. There would be other challenges, other obstacles to overcome. But for the first time in months, Marcos felt optimistic about facing those challenges. Not because they'd become easier, but because they wouldn't be facing them alone. "Daddy," Emma said, appearing in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas, "will you read me a story tonight?" "Of course." "Which book?" "The one about the little girl who finds a family." Marcos smiled, understanding that Emma's book choice wasn't random. "Go get it, I'll be right there." As Emma skipped back to her room, Marcos heard Sarah singing softly to Jacob in the bathroom, a gentle lullaby that spoke of love and security. The sounds of their makeshift family preparing for bed filled the apartment with warmth. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, tonight they were all safe, fed, and cared for. Sometimes that was enough to build dreams on. And sometimes dreams had a way of becoming reality when the right people decided to believe in them together. 3 weeks into their new routine, the apartment hummed with the organized chaos of a busy household. Sarah's first paycheck had arrived, and with it, a sense of pride and independence she hadn't felt in months. She'd insisted on buying groceries and contributing to household expenses, despite Marcos's protests. "It's not about the money," she'd explained while stocking the refrigerator, with fresh vegetables and real fruit. "It's about being a partner, not a charity case." Now, as Marcos prepared Jacob's morning bottle while Sarah got ready for work, their choreographed morning routine felt as natural as if they'd been doing it for years. "Jacob's diaper bag is packed," Sarah called from the bathroom, where she was applying the minimal makeup she could afford. "He had a good night, but he might be getting another tooth soon." "Noted," Marcos replied, testing the bottle temperature on his wrist. "Emma, shoes! I'm putting them on." Emma's voice came from her bedroom, where she was supposedly getting dressed but was more likely playing with Jacob's toys. Sarah emerged from the bathroom, looking professional in her thrift store blazer and carefully ironed shirt. Over the past 3 weeks, she'd developed a small wardrobe of work-appropriate clothes, each piece chosen with the precision of someone who understood the value of every dollar. "You look nice," Marcos said, and meant it. There was a confidence in Sarah's bearing, now that hadn't been there when they'd first met. "Thank you. Mr. Patterson wants to discuss expanding my responsibilities today. Apparently, I've been picking up the computer systems faster than anyone expected." "That's great news. More responsibilities usually means more money," Sarah finished with a smile. "I know. I might actually be able to start looking at apartments soon." The words should have made Marcos happy. After all, the goal had always been to help Sarah get back on her feet so she could establish her own home, but instead he felt an unexpected stab of disappointment. "That's wonderful," he said, hoping his voice sounded more enthusiastic than he felt. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, one shoe on and one shoe in her hand. "Are we talking about Sarah moving out?" "We're talking about Sarah having options," Marcos corrected gently. "But I don't want Sarah and Jacob to move out," Emma said, her lower lip beginning to tremble. "I like having them here." Sarah knelt down to Emma's level, Sweetheart, even if Jacob and I get our own place, we'll still see each other all the time. We'll still be friends. But it won't be the same, Emma protested. We won't eat breakfast together or read stories to Jacob or make soup on rainy days. Marcos saw Sarah's composure waver slightly. The truth was, none of them wanted things to change. They'd created something special in their small apartment, a family unit that worked despite being unconventional. Let's not worry about that right now, Marcos said. We're all here today, and that's what matters. But Emma's words had planted a seed of melancholy that followed Marcos through his morning at the auto shop. Tony noticed his distraction as they worked on a transmission replacement. You're awful quiet today, Tony observed, wiping grease from his hands. Everything okay at home? Yeah, everything's fine. Sarah got some good news at work. That's good, right? So why do you look like someone died? Marcos set down his wrench and leaned against the workbench. She's talking about getting her own place soon. And nothing. That was always the plan. Tony studied him with the knowing look of someone who'd been married for 30 years. Marcos, are you in love with this woman? The question hit like a physical blow. What? No, I mean we're just helping each other out. Uh-huh. And how does she feel about you? Tony, it's not like that. We're roommates, co-parents, friends. Co-parents, huh? That's an interesting word choice for someone who's just helping out. Before Marcos could respond, his phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Can you call me when you get a break? Something important. Worry immediately replaced his earlier melancholy. I need to make a call, he told Tony. Sarah answered on the first ring. Marcos, thank goodness. Are you sitting down? No. Why? Is everything okay? Is Jacob's fine. This is about work. Mr. Patterson called me into his office this morning. Marcos's heart rate spiked. Are you in trouble? The opposite. He's offering me a promotion. Full-time, with benefits and a significant pay raise. Sarah, that's incredible. Congratulations. There's more. The position comes with a company car allowance and... She paused, her voice dropping to a whisper. Marcos, they're offering me $45,000 a year. Marcos nearly dropped his phone. 3 weeks ago, Sarah had been homeless and jobless. Now she was being offered a salary that would give her real financial stability. That's amazing. You must have really impressed them. I think I have. But Marcos, there's a catch. Of course there was. What kind of catch? The position is in their Denver office. They want me to relocate. The words hit Marcos like a punch to the gut. Denver was 800 miles away. It might as well have been another planet. When? He managed to ask. They want an answer by Friday. And if I accept, they'd want me to start in 3 weeks. 3 weeks, Marcos calculated quickly. Just enough time for Sarah to find an apartment, pack her few belongings, and disappear from their lives as suddenly as she'd entered them. What are you going to do? I don't know. It's an incredible opportunity, Marcos. The kind of job that could change everything for Jacob and me. But it would mean leaving you and Emma, and I don't know if I can do that. The admission hung between them across the phone line. Sarah had just confirmed what Marcos had been afraid to acknowledge, that their arrangement had become about much more than temporary help. Sarah, you have to take it. What? You have to take the job. It's exactly what you need to build a secure future for Jacob. Marcos, no, listen to me. You can't pass up an opportunity like this because of us. Emma and I will be fine, but... Even as he said the words, Marcos knew they weren't entirely true. They would survive without Sarah and Jacob, but they wouldn't be the same. The apartment would feel empty, Emma would be heartbroken, and Marcos would have to face the fact that he'd fallen in love with a woman who was about to walk out of his life. I need to think about it, Sarah said quietly. Of course you do. We'll talk more when you get home tonight. After hanging up, Marcos stood in the auto shop's parking lot, trying to process the whirlwind of emotions. He should be happy for Sarah. This was exactly what she'd been working toward: independence, security, a real future for her son. So why did he feel like his world was falling apart? "Bad news?" Tony asked, appearing beside him. "Good news, actually. Sarah got offered a promotion." "Then why do you look like you're about to throw up?" "Because the job is in Denver." Tony let out a low whistle. "That's a problem." "No, it's not a problem, it's life. Sarah needs to do what's best for her and Jacob. And what about what's best for you and Emma?" "We'll adjust. We always do." Tony shook his head. "Marcos, I've watched you for the past 3 weeks. You're happier than I've seen you since your wife died. That woman and her baby have brought something back to life in you. Tony. And from what I can see, she feels the same way. So maybe instead of being noble and selfless, you should fight for what you want. It's not that simple." "Why not?" Marcos struggled for an answer. "Because Sarah deserves better than a part-time mechanic who's barely keeping his head above water." "That's the biggest load of crap I've heard in weeks," Tony said bluntly. "You're a good man, Marcos. You're a great father. You're honest, hard-working, and you've got a heart the size of Colorado. Any woman would be lucky to have you. Even if that were true, I can't ask Sarah to give up a career opportunity for me. Who says you have to ask her to give it up? Maybe there's another solution." Before Marcos could ask what Tony meant, his phone rang again. This time it was Emma's school. "Mr. Chen, this is Mrs. Patterson from Lincoln Elementary. Emma is in the nurse's office with a stomach ache. Can you come pick her up?" Marcos's worry shifted immediately to his daughter. "Is she okay? Does she have a fever?" "No fever, but she says her tummy hurts, and she wants to go home. I'll be right there." 20 minutes later, Marcos found Emma sitting in the nurse's office, looking pale and miserable. "Hey, baby girl, how are you feeling?" "My stomach hurts," Emma said quietly. The nurse, a kind woman named Mrs. Rodriguez, pulled Marcos aside. "She doesn't have any symptoms of illness. Sometimes children get stomach aches when they're worried or upset about something." Marcos knelt down beside Emma's chair. "Sweetheart, are you worried about something?" Emma's eyes filled with tears. "I heard you talking to Sarah this morning about her moving out. And then at school, Casey said when grown-ups talk about people moving away, it means they're not happy living together anymore." Marcos felt his heart break a little. "Oh, Emma, come here." He gathered his daughter in his arms, feeling her small body shake with suppressed sobs. "Sarah getting a new job doesn't mean we're not happy living together," he explained gently. "Sometimes adults have to make decisions about work that are separate from their feelings about family. But if Sarah takes the job, she and Jacob will go away forever." "Not forever. We could visit and they could come see us." "It's not the same," Emma whispered, echoing her words from the morning. "No," Marcos admitted. "It's not the same." They drove home in relative silence, Emma curled up in her car seat, looking small and sad. When they arrived at the apartment, Marcos was surprised to find Sarah's car in the parking lot. "Sarah's home early," Emma observed, perking up slightly. They found Sarah sitting on the couch with Jacob, but something was wrong. Her eyes were red, and she looked as miserable as Emma had at school. "What are you doing at home?" Marcos asked. "I left work early. I couldn't concentrate after our phone call." Sarah looked at Emma's pale face. "What's wrong with Emma?" "Stomach ache," Marcos explained. "The kind that comes from worrying too much." Emma walked over to Sarah and climbed onto the couch beside her. "Are you and Jacob going to move to Denver?" Sarah's composure cracked. "I don't know, sweetheart. It's a very good job, but it would mean moving far away from you and your daddy." "I don't want you to go," Emma said simply. "I don't want to go either," Sarah admitted, tears starting to fall. "But sometimes grown-ups have to do things they don't want to do." Jacob, sensing the emotional tension in the room, began to fuss. Emma immediately reached for him, and he settled in her small arms with the trust that had developed over their weeks together. Look, Emma said. Jacob doesn't want to go either. He likes it here with us. Marcos watched his daughter comfort the baby while Sarah wiped tears from her eyes, and something crystallized in his mind. This wasn't just about helping a friend anymore. This was about family, the kind of family that forms not through blood or legal documents, but through choice and love and commitment. Sarah, he said quietly, what if you didn't have to choose? What do you mean? What if there was a way for you to take the job and for us to stay together? Sarah looked at him with confusion and hope. I don't understand. Denver's a big city. They need mechanics there too. The implication of his words hung in the air. Sarah's eyes widened. Marcos, you can't be serious. You can't uproot your entire life for me. Why not? Emma and I don't have family here. My job is okay, but it's not a career. What's keeping us here besides habit? But Emma's school, your friends. Emma can go to school anywhere. And my best friend is sitting right here on this couch. Sarah stared at him, Jacob content in Emma's arms, the weight of possibility settling over all of them. Are you asking what I think you're asking? Sarah whispered. Marcos took a deep breath, knowing he was about to change everything. I'm asking if you want to be a family, a real family. Not roommates or co-parents or temporary arrangements, but a family. Emma looked up from Jacob with shining eyes. Really, Daddy, we could all move to Denver together. If Sarah wants us to, Marcos said, his eyes never leaving Sarah's face. Sarah was crying openly now, but her tears seemed different, lighter somehow. Are you sure? She asked. Are you absolutely sure? Because if we do this, if we really become a family, I need to know it's forever. Jacob and I can't handle any more uncertainty. Marcos crossed to the couch and knelt in front of Sarah and Emma and Jacob. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. And in that moment, as Emma cheered and Jacob gurgled happily and Sarah reached for Marcos's hand, their little apartment filled with the kind of joy that comes from choosing love over fear, together over apart, family over everything else. The future was uncertain, full of logistics to work out and challenges to face, but they would face them together as the family they'd chosen to become. 6 months later, Marcos stood in the kitchen of their new home in Denver, sunlight streaming through windows that overlooked the Rocky Mountains. The house wasn't large, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a kitchen that opened into a family room, but it was theirs, all of theirs. The morning routine had evolved but maintained its comfortable rhythm. Sarah, now a senior accounts coordinator at Patterson and Associates, prepared for her day, while Jacob, nearly 15 months old and walking with the confident wobble of a toddler, chased his favorite ball around the living room. Emma, thriving in her new school, sat at the breakfast table, working on a math worksheet while eating the pancakes Marcos had made, their Saturday morning tradition that had successfully transferred to their new life. Daddy, can Jacob come too? My school's family day next Friday, Emma asked, looking up from her homework. Of course he can. We're all coming, remember? Good. I want to show him off to my new friends. They think he's really cute. Sarah emerged from the bedroom, adjusting her earrings. Over the past months, her wardrobe had expanded significantly, but she still approached each workday with the same determined professionalism that had earned her the promotion. Good morning, family, she said, the word rolling off her tongue with the ease of long practice. Morning, Mummy, Emma chirped, then caught herself. I mean, Sarah. Sorry. It was a slip that had been happening more frequently lately. Emma had never asked permission to think of Sarah as a second mother, but the relationship had developed naturally over their months together. Sarah had never corrected her, and Marcos had noticed how her face lit up each time Emma used the word. It's okay, sweetheart, Sarah said, leaning down to kiss the top of Emma's head. You can call me whatever feels right to you. Jacob toddled over to Marcos, holding up his arms in the universal toddler signal for pick me up. As Marcos lifted him, Jacob babbled what sounded suspiciously like dada, though Sarah insisted he was just making noise. Any word from Tony? About the Henderson job? Sarah asked, pouring coffee into her travel mug. He should call today with the final numbers. If it goes through, it'll be enough to make our first real house payment. Their current house was a rental, but the owner had expressed interest in selling, and Marcos and Sarah had been quietly saving for a down payment. The idea of owning a home together felt like the final piece of making their unconventional family. Official Sarah's success at Patterson and Associates had exceeded everyone's expectations, including her own. Within 3 months of starting, she'd identified inefficiencies in their client management system and proposed solutions that saved the company significant time and money. Her salary had been adjusted twice, and she'd been fast-tracked into a management position. Marcos's transition had been equally successful, though more gradual. He'd found work at Henderson Classic Cars, a restoration shop that specialized in vintage vehicles. The owner, Mike Henderson, appreciated Marcos's attention to detail and work ethic. What had started as basic mechanical work had evolved into project management, as Marcos demonstrated an ability to coordinate complex restorations from start to finish. I should get going, Sarah said, gathering her purse and jacket. The Morrison account presentation is this afternoon. You'll do great, Marcos said, meaning it. He'd watched Sarah's confidence grow over the months, seen her embrace challenges that would have terrified her when they'd first met. Wish me luck, Sarah said, leaning up to kiss his cheek, a gesture that had become natural but still sent warmth through his chest. Good luck, Mommy, Emma said, then grinned at her deliberate word choice. After Sarah left for work, Marcos settled into his own morning routine with Jacob, while Emma finished getting ready for school. The toddler had developed a fascination with Marcos's tools, and while most were safely stored away, Marcos had given him a set of plastic wrenches that Jacob carried everywhere. Dada, Jacob said clearly, holding up a plastic screwdriver. Did you hear that? Emma asked excitedly. He said Daddy! Marcos felt his heart skip. Jacob had been babbling for months, but this was the first time the sound had been unmistakably intentional. I heard it, Marcos said, lifting Jacob and spinning him around. Good job, buddy, Jacob giggled, delighted with the reaction his new word had produced. As Marcos dropped Emma at school, she chattered about her upcoming presentation on families. Mrs. Kim said we should talk about what makes our families special, Emma explained. I'm going to talk about how sometimes the best families are the ones you choose, not just the ones you're born into. That sounds perfect, sweetheart. And I'm going to tell them about how you shared your last $20 with Sarah and Jacob, and how that one choice changed all our lives. Marcos smiled, remembering that day in the grocery store. At the time, $20 had seemed like a huge sacrifice. Now it felt like the best investment he'd ever made. At Henderson Classic Cars, Marcos found Mike waiting with unusual excitement. Marcos, you're not going to believe this, Mike said, holding up a letter. Remember the '67 Mustang restoration we finished last month? The one for the collector in California? Sure. Beautiful car. What about it? He was so impressed with our work that he recommended us to a friend who owns a classic car dealership. They want to contract us for 12 restorations over the next year. Marcos felt his pulse quicken. 12 full restorations would mean steady work and good money for months. There's more, Mike continued. They're offering to pay us enough that I can bring you on as a full partner, not just an employee. What do you say? The offer was beyond anything Marcos had imagined when he'd first started at the shop. A partnership would mean real financial security, the kind that could support a mortgage and college funds and all the dreams he'd been afraid to dream. Mike, I don't know what to say. Say yes. You've earned this, Marcos. Your work on that Mustang was flawless, and your project management has made this shop more efficient than it's ever been. As Marcos drove home that afternoon, his mind raced with possibilities. The partnership offer, combined with Sarah's continued success, would make them genuinely financially stable for the first time in years. They could buy the house, start college funds for Emma and Jacob, maybe even take a real vacation. But more than the financial security, Marcos felt the deep satisfaction of having rebuilt his life into something better than it had been before. Not just for himself, but for all of them. At home, he found Sarah had beaten him there, a rare occurrence given her usual schedule. "You're home early?" he said, walking into the kitchen where she was starting dinner preparations. "I have news," Sarah said, but her expression was unreadable. Marcos felt a familiar flutter of anxiety. "Good news or bad news? I'm not sure yet. Mr. Patterson called me into his office this afternoon, and they're opening a new branch in Seattle. They want me to head it up." Marcos felt the world tilt slightly. Seattle? It would be a significant promotion, regional manager, substantial pay increase, equity in the company. Sarah turned to face him fully. "It's the kind of opportunity that comes along once in a lifetime. When would you have to start? That's the thing. They're not asking me to relocate. They want me to commute for the first 6 months while they set up the office, then work remotely from here." Relief flooded through Marcos. "So, you could take it without us having to move again?" "I could. But Marcos, the travel schedule would be intense. I'd be gone 3 days a week for the first 6 months. We could handle that." "Are you sure? It would mean you'd be managing the house and the kids mostly on your own during those trips." "Sarah, I managed Emma alone for 3 years, and now Emma's older and Jacob's more predictable. We'd make it work." Sarah studied his face. "You really mean that?" "I really mean that. This is your career, Sarah. You've worked incredibly hard to get here. You should take every opportunity that comes your way, even if it means more complications for our family. Especially then. Our family is strong enough to handle complications." That evening, after Emma had gone to bed and Jacob was sleeping peacefully in his crib, Marcos and Sarah sat on their back porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink. "I keep thinking about that day in the grocery store," Sarah said quietly. "What about it? About how desperate I felt, how convinced I was that Jacob and I were completely alone in the world." "You were never alone. You just hadn't found your people yet." "My people," Sarah repeated, smiling. "I like that. Sarah, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you ever regret it? This unconventional family we've created? Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you'd made different choices?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously. "I think about it. Sometimes," she admitted. "But not with regret, more with amazement. If someone had told me a year ago that I'd be living in Denver with a man I barely knew and his daughter, that I'd have a job I love and a future I'm excited about, I would have thought they were crazy. And now I can't imagine my life any other way." She turned to look at him directly. "Marcos, you and Emma saved Jacob and me. But more than that, you gave us a family. You gave us a home. You gave us just as much, maybe more. How do you figure? You taught Emma what it means to care for others. You showed her that families can be created through choice and love, not just biology. And you—" He paused, searching for the right words. "You brought joy back into my life. I didn't realize how much I'd been just surviving until you showed me what it felt like to really live again." Sarah reached for his hand. "So what happens now?" "Now we keep building. You take the Seattle job. I become Mike's partner." Emma continues, "Being the most amazing kid in the world, and Jacob keeps calling me Daddy until it becomes official." "Official?" Marcos felt his heart rate increase. They'd been dancing around this conversation for months, but tonight felt like the right time to finally have it. "Sarah, We've been living as a family for almost a year. We share everything: bills, responsibilities, dreams, fears. Emma thinks of you as her mother. Jacob thinks of me as his father. What's stopping us from making it legal?" Sarah's eyes widened. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" "I'm asking if you want to marry me. Not because it's practical or convenient, but because I love you, because I love our family, because I can't imagine my life without you in it." Tears started flowing down Sarah's cheeks, but she was smiling. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, absolutely yes." They kissed as the last light faded from the sky, the mountains standing as silent witnesses to their commitment. "There's one more thing," Marco said when they broke apart. "What?" "I want to adopt Jacob officially, and I'd love for you to adopt Emma if you're open to that. You want us to really, truly be a family in every way? I want what we already are to be recognized by the world." Sarah launched herself into his arms, laughing and crying at the same time. "I can't believe this is my life," she said. "I can't believe something so beautiful came from something so desperate." Inside the house, they could hear Emma's voice, through her bedroom window, apparently reading a bedtime story to her stuffed animals, and the family lived happily ever after. Emma's voice drifted out, because they chose to love each other every single day. Marcos and Sarah looked at each other and laughed. "She's wise beyond her years," Sarah observed. "She gets that from you," Marcos said. "She gets it from all of us." Later that night, as they lay in bed planning their future, a small wedding, the adoption processes, the logistics of Sarah's new job, Marcos reflected on the journey that had brought them here. It had started with $20 and a choice to help a stranger. That single act of kindness had created ripples that changed 4 lives completely. Emma now had the mother she'd never known she needed. Jacob had a father who would love and protect him unconditionally. Sarah had found security, purpose, and love. And Marcos had discovered that sometimes the best things in life come disguised as complications. "Marcos?" Sarah whispered in the darkness. Thank you. For what?" "For seeing us, for helping us, for choosing us. Thank you for letting me." In the room next door, Emma slept peacefully, surrounded by her stuffed animals and dreams of family presentations. Down the hall, Jacob slept in his crib, his plastic tools nearby, ready for tomorrow's adventures with his dad. And in their bed, Marcos and Sarah held each other close, no longer strangers brought together by circumstance, but partners who had chosen to build something beautiful from the fragments of their separate lives. The $20 Marcos had shared in that grocery store had multiplied beyond anything he could have imagined. Not in monetary value, but in love, in family, in the kind of wealth that couldn't be measured in bank accounts, but in bedtime stories and morning pancakes and the sound of children's laughter filling a home. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest miracles. And sometimes, when you think you're rescuing someone else, you end up rescuing yourself. Their story had started with a single dad sharing his last $20. It would continue with a family that had chosen each other, building a future, filled with love, laughter, and the unimaginable joy of finding exactly where they belonged. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.